It is nice to be back in person again. I'm not sure if I've been at an event with quite this many familiar faces in a very, very long time, so it's good to be here. I just want to set the stage for you a little bit on what we're going to do here this morning. Logistics, are always important. We'll take a break around 10 o'clock, and there'll be coffee and refreshments, and we will wrap at 11:30, but we have a lot to do in between now and then. You may be wondering how we got here this morning. We feel very strongly, and when I say we, I mean our economic development team and your friends at the county, feel very strongly that this is a time of amazing opportunity. While it might be very easy for some communities to feel a little beaten down by the impact of, a global pandemic and all kinds of other things over the last couple of years, we are viewing this as a time that Klamath really has a unique opportunity to reinvent itself. Now, yes, communities across the country also have an opportunity to do that, but we think that not everyone will embrace it with the same vigor as we are. So we are looking at this as a chance to say, who do we want to be? What do we want to do? Everything's on the table. There's no bad ideas. Well, sometimes there's bad ideas, but there's really no right or wrong answer. It's what does this community want to be as we move forward. I know everybody's getting tired of the term the new normal, but I think it's not going to be a new normal. It's just going to be something new. So we really want to focus on opportunity here today. We certainly believe that our best days are in front of us, not behind us, and we're really looking forward to having a spark of creativity and optimism and hope that we hope our panelists will help convey to you, but we also hope you'll get that. And whether or not big ideas come out of today, this morning, between now and 11:30, maybe, but it also might just be planting a seed today so that we can all really grow into something even more prosperous and beautiful tomorrow. So with that, I would like to thank a couple of our sponsors. Our title, and if our sponsors are here, I invite them to please stand up to be recognized. Our title sponsor is Coldwell Banker Holman Premier Realty. I know Randy is here. Yes. Also, Margot Duran with EXP Realty, and Margot was really literally the first person to step up and say, yes, I want to do this. So I'm not sure if she's here yet, but can we give her a round of applause? Also some recognition, I know Lake County Commissioner, our friend Mark Albertson, was going to come this morning. I'm not sure if he made it over quite yet, but I thought that was really just wonderful that he wanted to come. Representative Reschke has been involved in these conversations as well. And with that, really, I just want to leave you here today on, I'm not going anywhere, but just the thought that our goal here today is really to start conversations going on how we take this new opportunity and run with it in a way that only Klamath can. So I'm so happy to see you. I'm feeling very inspired this morning by all your faces. And with that, please welcome Randy Cox, our CEO of KCDA.
Kelly just took my script, so
sorry.
we'll have to sort of wing it here. No, I'll be okay.
Very organized.
I'd like to echo Kelly's comments and just thank everyone for attending this morning. It's hard to pick which day. We've postponed this thing 2 or 3 times, and now we're actually having it. Maybe not the right time, but we'll see. Monday mornings are usually really good mornings. Everybody wants to go to Economic Summit Monday morning. It looks good. I'd like to thank Kelly for Commissioner Morris for helping us assemble this group, and it was an idea that I think we started in August of last year. Hey, let's do an economic summit, a recovery summit. I'd like to also thank the KCDA Executive Committee for supporting this event and moving it forward, and their support always is greatly appreciated. I'd like to also, Steve, I know I saw you this morning, Steve Vincent, thanks so much for being a sponsor of this event. Vista Utilities makes a big difference in our community, and we appreciate that. What I want to do is just go through about 72 slides here, so Damon and Josh wouldn't have to speak at all. So, choose Klamath. Our purpose and mission is purposeful, sustainable, and diversified economic growth within Klamath County. We really look at economic growth under three pillars: recruitment and attraction, retention and expansion, and then scalable entrepreneurship. Those are the three pillars that we work on a daily basis. And if you note up on the top left-hand corner of this slide, you'll see a strategic plan that was put together in June of 2019. That three-year plan ends in June of 2022. This event is really driven to start rewriting our three-year plan for the next 3 years, starting in July of 2022. So we appreciate the input and the direction that you see that our economy and our direction of our economy and sustainable growth for Klamath County means. Hopefully you guys all have a program, and it's my pleasure and honor to introduce our first guest speaker. Josh Leiner is the economist for the Oregon Office of Economic Analysis. Josh develops the State of Oregon quarterly economic forecasts, including outlooks for employment, income, and housing availability. Additionally, Josh acts as the state's de facto vice economist for forecasting revenues for Oregon Lottery. Josh graduated with a BA degree in economics from the University of Colorado and a master's degree in economics from Portland State University. Outside of work, Josh enjoys spending time with his wife and kids, traveling throughout the state of Oregon, and consuming some of Oregon's special craft beverages. I didn't ask him what those beverages were, but I can assume what they were. But please join me in introducing and welcoming Josh as our first speaker.
All right, thanks, Randy. Thanks, Commissioner, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you all this morning. Yeah, our office, we do the economic revenue forecasting for the state, for the legislature and the governor as a planning device of what's going to happen both over the next 2-year budget period for the state and for the longer-term health of Oregon's economy. And today, I wanted to come with 4 main things I hope you would remember by the time you go back to work in the afternoon. 4 things: too good, too bad, right? On the good front, we're in this economic boom, right? We're in the fastest economic recovery we've ever seen in our lifetimes. It's sustained. People have money. They're trying to spend it. All these really positive things going on in the economy. The bad part is it's an inflationary boom, right? That's not necessarily a huge problem per se, but it makes it more challenging to plan when you have costs rising faster and then you're not sure how much can I pass on to the consumers. My costs are going up 8%. Can I do a full 8% to the customers and the final prices? It makes it more challenging and more unpredictable, certainly relative to what we've seen in recent decades. So that's one good, one bad. At the local level, one good, one bad, one challenge, one opportunity, is that the local demographics are a little bit of a drag on growth. The demographic structure, a shrinking working age population means things like labor are going to be even harder to come by in the decade ahead than they are today. And of course, it's hard to find labor today. So the local demographics are a challenge everywhere, including here in Klamath. The good news is that the industrial structure, so how many construction firms do we have? How many hospitals or healthcare firms do we have? How many professional business firms do we have and the like? The industrial structure is very good and prone for good growth in the years ahead. So again, two good things, 2 challenges that need to be addressed in the overall. But overall, again, we're in this recovery. It's a really strong recovery, primarily because incomes are up. Right here, we're looking at household income, median household income, reverting back to your high school math. Right, median is the midpoint. 50% of people have lower income. 50% of people have higher income. To date, last year, in 2020 and in 2021, household incomes were up. Poverty was down, despite the pandemic, despite record levels of job loss. And the reason is primarily because of federal aid. We had a 10% hole in the economy, right? We shut things down. We blew a 10% hole in the economy at the start of the pandemic. And then we filled that 10% hole with 25% worth of GDP of federal aid. Enhanced unemployment insurance benefits, recovery rebates, paycheck protection program, loans, child tax credit, deferred student loan payments, a whole host of things, more than filled the hole we put in the economy. And so overall, people have the money and they're trying to spend. Locally, we just got some 2020 data, so now we're a year out of date, but it takes a while for some of these big national statistics to come out. Here locally, incomes grew by 11%, or 10.7% in 2020 here in Klamath County. That's in the 81st percentile of the nation. That means 81% of U.S. counties, and there's more than 3,000 of them, Klamath's income grew faster than 81% of them. So only 19% of the counties across the entire country grew faster from an income perspective. So again, that is providing local households with the ability to make rent, pay utilities, put food on the table, buy Christmas presents, and the like. And so overall incomes are up much more than the national average and the statewide average here locally, at least at the start of the pandemic, thanks to that federal aid. And so overall, that is the sustained reason, the big, strong, good economic news that we have. People have money, and we're trying to spend it. But of course, the demand side of the economy is not the problem because we have the money and we're trying to spend it. The problems in the economy have come on the supply side, where we're trying to grow really, really quickly, and there are things holding us back, and we're not able to grow as fast as we would like. First one on the list would be COVID, right? At this point, it's not so much about shutdowns. We haven't had shutdowns in quite some time. It's about workplace disruptions. Teachers get out sick, nurses get out sick, and so then you can't function as well as a business as possible. Same at the warehouses and the manufacturing companies and the like, where you just lose productivity. Less bodies in there, you're losing work, you're not able to produce as much as you typically would. That results in some slower economic growth due to those workplace disruptions from the pandemic itself. Labor is hard to come by today. We have very, very low unemployment rates. Participation rates, at least nationally, have not rebounded. So there's some segment of the population that is sidelined and not actively looking for work in the U.S. economy, and that makes it harder to hire businesses and hire workers for businesses and the like. And labor runs through everything. So that's the biggest constraint today, is because labor runs through everything, so you're not able to produce as much stuff. If we look at our industrial production numbers, we're at capacity. We need to start building more plants, put in more equipment, increase truck driving, increase warehousing space and the like. But it's hard to do all of that if you also don't have the workers to follow suit and to actually expand your business operations. And so labor runs through everything. It's the biggest constraint today. And when we have a tight labor market and this constraint on labor relative to what businesses would like to hire, we see wages go through the roof, right? This is what this chart's trying to show. Is on the left, employment in Oregon, as of our last forecast, was down 4%. We still had at that time, 80, 90,000 jobs whole in the state of Oregon. Today it's more like 60,000, a 3% jobs whole, so still sizable gap to go in terms of payroll employment at the statewide level for sure. But the chart on the right, wages, the total wages earned for the workers is at a historic all-time high, and we've actually increased our outlook for the labor market, increased our outlook for wages paid relative to pre-pandemic expectations for the state of Oregon, because labor is so tight to come by. Businesses are raising them. Average wages in the state are up 15% since the start of the pandemic, right? And most of that is just due to fundamental per worker increases. And so overall, it's a tight labor market. Wages are going up, business costs are going up, and that's being passed forward in the terms of higher prices to consumers, right? This is the bad part of the inflationary boom, is the inflation part, where inflation overall is currently running at a 9 to 10% annual run rate. These are inflation numbers we haven't seen since the 1980s. I think you have to go back to 1990, 1991 to see the last time we saw 6% inflation, and right now we're running faster than that. And so for a while, economists, the Federal Reserve included, was saying, well, we have a lot of these temporary known problems in the economy, right? We have chips, semiconductor shortages for automobiles, right? We're not producing as many cars as we would like to buy. And so used car prices are up 30 or 40%. Because we're not buying the new, we're not building new cars and selling those, so therefore the overall supply is limited for the entire car market. So if we strip that up, that's a known specific shortage going on in the economy. That's not really indicative of broader inflation in the economy. It's something that's not really problematic from a fundamental perspective. Even if you're trying to buy a car, it's hugely problematic. So that's going on. Then we have what are called pandemic-affected services. Well, at the start of the pandemic, we didn't get on airplanes. We didn't go to Cancun or Hawaii or maybe even the coast or something like that. We stopped going on vacations. those prices started to sag. As we started to go on vacations again, hotel prices, airfares, rental car prices, and the like just went through the roof again. They're up about 20% in the last 12 or 18 months. But that's kind of just getting us back to where we thought they should have been pre-pandemic anyway, because they dropped to start the pandemic, they've surged to get back to where they were. And so again, that's kind of that's a temporary type of burst of inflation. That's going to peter out. We're not going to see hotel prices go up 20% every single year forever. And so that's a temporary thing. We strip those out, right? And we look at kind of that other, the blue bar, if you can see it from the back of the audience, that all other category. Well, you can see what's going on in that all other category is that has accelerated and firmed and is running 2 to 3 percentage points faster than the Federal Reserve target indicates. The Federal Reserve wants 2% inflation. Well, that all others running at 4 or 5% today. That's the challenge. That's the problem. And the big reason here is inflation is not costless, right? Inflation has a lot of costs in the economy. From a business operations perspective, it's harder, it's less predictable about what you're able to pass on to your customers. So what is that going to mean for your profit margins and the like? For workers, when inflation rises faster than the wage gains you're seeing, we're seeing great wage gains. Again, the average wage is up 15%, but the inflation adjusted average wage is only up 7 or 8%, right? Because inflation is starting to bite into some of those wage gains, which means you can start to see a decline in your standard of living when inflation outstrips your wage or income gains. And so that's a challenge from a household perspective. And then ultimately it leads to something called demand destruction, or what economists call demand destruction, where if the price of things get too high, we just stop buying them. And if we stop buying them, that means we need to produce less. If we need to produce less, we need to have fewer workers. We have fewer workers, we have less wage income growing and circulating throughout the economy. So you can get to this point where inflation and prices get so high that it tips us back into kind of a recessionary type dynamic. And that is something that has economists and the Federal Reserve spooked in the last 6 months. Up until maybe 3 or 4 months ago, certainly 6 months ago, the Federal Reserve saying it's temporary, it's transitory, it's going to peter out, it's not that big of a concern. Well, since it's broadened out, that blue bar has gotten bigger in the chart, the Federal Reserve has made a very hard pivot, or at least a very hard pivot for a bureaucratic agency like the Federal Reserve, where they're saying, okay, we're going to start tightening monetary policy, start raising interest rates much faster and quicker than anticipated even 3 or 4 months ago. And so looking at interest rates this year in 2022, right now the Federal Reserve is signaling 3 interest rate hikes. Whereas before they were saying, we're not going to hike rates until 2024, 2025, years into the future. They've been pulling forward that date, and now they're saying 3 times this year. I would err, 3 to 4 times is probably more on the upside of what you should expect, particularly if this inflation persists much longer than it already has, and it certainly persisted much longer than people thought. So this is something to keep in mind. This will not sap the economy. This will probably take the wind out of the sails of price appreciation in the housing market. It's not going to really, it's not really going to kick demand to the curb, so to speak, but it will cool the economy a little bit, hopefully alleviate some of these price pressures, so this inflationary boom that we're in can transition into a sustained economic boom and not ultimately leading to some sort of boom-bust cycle like we saw back in the 1970s. So that's the big macroeconomic risk, is the inflation and the way the Federal Reserve is responding to it, and whether they're raising rates fast enough to cool inflation, but not too fast to send us back into recession. This is a huge deal, has been, and will continue to be in the years ahead. So if we look locally in terms of growth, if we think about the economy, what is the economy? How do we measure it? What do we think about it? It's really how many workers do you have, and then how productive is each worker? And then, of course, from that productivity perspective, some of that's going to get paid out in wages to the worker, some of that's going to be the cost of capital, some of that's going to be profits and the like, right? And so when we think about it, and growth moving forward, local demographics, as I said, are a challenge. There is a large bulge of baby boomers retiring from the workforce today and continuing to retire for the decade ahead. That bulge, that imbalance in the labor market is everywhere. It is everywhere across the entire country. It's maybe a little bit more pronounced here locally in Klamath, but all rural counties, frankly, have it much more pronounced than the national average or the state average or the like. And demographically, Klamath is roughly in the middle of this baby boomer bulge. We go next door to Lake County, it's even more pronounced, where the imbalance is from a demographic perspective. So what does this mean? Well, it means overall the population will still be there. The customer base will still be there. People will live. People want to, buy houses, sell houses, buy food and clothing and all that sort of stuff, but the working age population is shrinking. It's going to be flat at best, most likely down a little bit. That means labor is going to be harder to come by for businesses looking to sustain their workforce, let alone hire and expand and increase it moving forward. So that's certainly a challenge in the years ahead. So then we turn to the productivity. Well, how do you make your workforce more productive? There's a lot of different ways, different forms of capital, whether it's financial access to finances so we can have new business startups and expansions and the like. Physical capital, that's plants and equipment and software and office space, so you can allow your workers to be more productive. Natural capital is basically you're putting our natural resources to their highest and best use. I'll let you define that how you want to, but that is another way to raise productivity in a regional economy. Human and social, it's the skills of the workforce. The tight-knit communities actually provide a lot of benefits that are harder to measure from our standard economic data, but the research shows that social capital, a nice community and interactions where you support each other and all the like, does raise things like economic mobility and long-run growth and all those sort of things that we care about. So in the short term, one of the big discussions we've been having everywhere I go across the state is, well, we've had the pandemic, we've had the shutdowns, we have this rise of remote work. We're just seeing this big influx of Californians moving here and driving up our housing prices because of remote work. And there might be some of that. There's been that going on since the dawn of time, right? We've had southern neighbors moving north of the border for millennia at this point. And so that is going on to a certain degree, but overall, in the state of Oregon, there has been no pandemic-related migration boom. Population growth slowed in 2020 at the start of the pandemic, and it was even slower in 2021. So to the extent that we are seeing pandemic-related migration moves, it's not nearly enough to offset the normal dynamics of population, which is very pro-cyclical. People move for job opportunities, and there weren't very many job opportunities in 2020. We were shut down, we were sheltering in place, we were trying to just survive. Now there's a lot of job opportunities everywhere right now, but as the economies revive, we're seeing migration trends start to pick back up. The number of driver's licenses surrendered at the DMV has really accelerated in the last 6 to 9 months. And so migration's coming back, but there was no general pandemic-related migration boom anywhere in the state of Oregon, even north in Deschutes. Bend's always one of the fastest growing places in the state. Well, last year it grew slower than it did last decade, right? So even though it's faster than the overall state, that's always the case as well, but it's still slower than it traditionally has been, certainly in recent decades. Population growth here locally, still positive, 0.4, 0.5 percentage points, which is just a hair slower than the statewide average. So in line with some expectations, positive. Good news, that's going to rebound and strengthen in the years ahead. Finally, the good news from the local economic perspective would be the industrial structure. So this chart, complicated, all 36 counties are bubbles on that. I tried to highlight the local ones. Vertically is current state of employment. How are we doing today relative to pre-pandemic based on the latest data that Damon will talk more about in a minute. And then horizontally, left and right, your industrial structure. So the mix of firms, the mix of industry here, construction, manufacturing, healthcare, leisure, and hospitality and the like, the mix of that relative to our office's forecast for industrial employment, right? Our forecast for our office over the next handful of years, how does your local composition of the workforce and your employers look like relative to our forecast from our office? And Klamath is great, right? Klamath is right there, the red dot, the big red dot, right on top of the star, right on top of the statewide average, both in terms of current economic performance from an employment perspective and the industrial structure moving forward. I highlighted four of the big drivers of that growth in the near term, right? Some of it is just continuing to rebound to where we were. A lot of growth in leisure and hospitality, because leisure and hospitality, our bars and our restaurants and our hotels and the travel industry and all that sort of stuff still isn't fully recovered. It is getting there, but it's not fully recovered. And so some of the strong growth in the near term is just reverting back as we go on vacations and out to eat a bit more as the pandemic wanes and pandemic fatigue sets in and all that sort of stuff. But other ones, right, professional business services, these are largely office-based type jobs. Klamath County has a lower share of all jobs than the statewide average in that, but our office-based jobs tend to be located in our big cities. So if you look at Multnomah County or Portland, right, they have the highest concentration. Then you go to Salem and Medford and some of our larger urban areas have the very, very high concentration of employment in office-based work. So that's really driving those statewide numbers higher. But for a rural county, right, these professional business service numbers here locally are twice, almost 3 times what it is across most of rural Oregon. So they're very, very good economic numbers. They point towards strong growth in the years ahead as this continues to be a growing share of the overall economy. Additionally, healthcare is something that'll grow a lot because we have a growing population and an aging population. Both of those point to ongoing demand for healthcare services and eventually residential home care facilities and the like in the years ahead. And then finally, transportation and warehousing, right? If you look at our transportation and warehousing, the shift to e-commerce from bricks to clicks, or however you want to talk about it, has been very, very pronounced. The pandemic accelerated that further. A lot of those jobs tend to be located on our interstates. And then on 97, there's actually a lot of it down here in Klamath on Southern Oregon with 97. The volume of traffic on 97 based upon an ODOT counter is at a historic all-time high recently. So the volume of trucks coming through and all that sort of stuff is back to where it was, and this is another growing segment of the economy which should lend itself to good local economic growth as well. And with that, I am out of time. Here's my contact information. Always happy to chat. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thanks, Josh. I appreciate it. Now I'd like to introduce Damon Rundberg. Damon is a young man that grew up in Pacific Northwest on a small cattle ranch in Rogue Valley. He is the Oregon Employment Department. He works for the Oregon Employment Department as economist. He specializes in rural economies and rural labor market analysis. He has a master's of public policy from the University, or excuse me, almost said the University of Oregon. That got me in a lot of trouble. Ooh. Oregon State University, where he concentrated on economics and resource management. He also has a bachelor's degree from Gonzaga. Please join me in welcoming Damon Rundberg.
Okay. All right, good to see everyone. And yes, go Zags. These days, I'm more of a Zag fan than a Beaver fan because, national titles and such. But someday, maybe our Beavs will do something. They blew up our stadium the other day. Did anyone see that video yet? I kind of hoped for more, if I'm completely honest. It's a little anticlimactic when that stadium came down. But it is a pleasure to be here with you all today. This is my first time in Klamath in almost 2 years, which is insane to say because I cover the whole central swath, the central third of the state of Oregon, and not having any meetings in person means that the places that I fully feel sort of connected with physically, I've been very disconnected from. So we're going to be looking at a lot of trends that we've seen with the employment trends in Klamath, a little bit of Lake we'll touch on, as well as labor trends and sort of what we can expect into the future. But I'm also excited to hear some of the conversations the rest of the morning as well, because you can get a lot from analyzing the data that's there, and it is good and mostly accurate data that we revise on a routine basis. But the anecdotal conversations of what people are experiencing also has a ton of value as well. So I'm here to be a learner as well as someone hopefully that's providing some useful content as we look into what the future might look like in the Klamath Basin here. So the first thing we'll look at is the shock that we saw. I don't want to spend too much time dwelling on the negatives that have been the last 2 years of our lives, but it is important, since I haven't spoken to a lot of you in a while in person, to sort of look at what that shock really looked like for us here locally. And you can see, relative to what we saw in 2019, I mean, we lost about 12.5% of total non-farm jobs. So these are payroll jobs. Excludes agriculture for the most part in this instance, but a pretty significant shock. The good news is that our shock was pretty consistent with what we see with the statewide. So Klamath in this instance here is that blue line, and the dotted black line is the state as a whole. So a shock that was relatively unprecedented. Us economists have been using that term, I think, way too often in the last 2 years. So I'm going to try not to say unprecedented for every slide. But just notice that these trends are very uncharacteristic of anything that we had seen before, so unprecedented, right? So huge shock there. But then you can see how quickly that flipped around the corner. And there was a lot of conversation in the spring of 2020. What was the shape of our recovery going to look like, right? And I'm sure many of you heard the term, are we going to see a V-shaped recovery or a K-shaped recovery, what it might be. We clearly, very clearly landed onto the V-shaped recovery. Very, very distinct drop, but a really impressive rebound on the back end. And sure, it didn't come back as quickly as we lost the jobs, but when you consider where we are today, so November of 2021 is the most recent number on the far right there. In Klamath County, employment levels to, as of, I almost said today, we're in January today. As of 2 months ago, we're only 2.5% below what they were in November of 2019. So we are very, very close to being recovered. And we are, tracked almost identically with the statewide trend. And Josh sort of, hit on that quite a bit, that a lot of our population numbers, our employment trends, some of the forecasts as far as demographics, et cetera, we mimic the state pretty well here, which is uncharacteristic of a rural county. We sort of are like half rural here in Klamath, where it's like there's a bit of a metropolitan flair to a rural county, and we definitely track closely. I threw a couple other counties on here just for some context of what the employment trends looked like across the state. For the most part, everyone saw that sort of really aggressive losses with COVID. Deschutes County here, our neighbors to the north, are the sort of the golden one that you see there. They were hit even harder because they had more sort of tourism, leisure and hospitality employment. They've actually recovered from the pandemic, which also is very fitting for Deschutes County, which has some of the poorest resistance to recession. They always get hit really hard with recession, but have some of the best recoverability in the nation. They bounce back quickly. So they sort of followed with their stereotype pretty aggressively, and us here, even in Klamath, sort of following along with just mimicking what the state does pretty well. Our neighbors to the east, Lake County, really jumps around there quite a bit. You can see based on their industry composition, Lake actually didn't get hit that hard from the pandemic, which was great to see. Our really smaller rural counties, not smaller in geography, obviously Lake is massive, but smaller in population, tended to get more of a glancing blow from the pandemic, and we saw that from Lake in particular. And then the one at the bottom here, Multnomah County, that's the one that has sort of been the drag on the statewide recovery overall. Multnomah is basically just Portland. And Portland has been the biggest leg that we've seen of any of our counties across the state today. Okay, so there's some good news there, right? So we bounced back quickly. We're tracking really closely with the state. And then, if we look at what this shock looks like, so this is basically the same graphic. The green line here is what our previous chart was, but it's condensed into a longer timeline. And we overlay that with what we saw with the Great Recession. So our most recent recession before this shock here. We got some good news and some bad news. The good news is, wow, look at how well we've recovered in this recession relative to what the last trend looked like. Much shorter period of time, even though the shock was about the same depth. You could see, we were actually saw the Great Recession was closer to like about 14% loss in total non-farm employment. So, but pretty consistent as far as the depth of the shock, but the recovery has been totally uncharacteristic from what we experienced in the last shock. So that's the good news, right? We were bouncing back really quickly in a way that, we're not accustomed to here locally. The bad news is, by the time this shock started, when the pandemic shock hit in March of 2020, we still had yet to have recovered from the last recession yet. So we hadn't even moved into expansion mode yet when the next shock hit. So that's the bad news. There are some things that we'll get to where I think that we're not only going to get that last 2.5% to get us back to being fully recovered from the COVID shock in the near future. I'm pretty optimistic that we'll also recover from that Great Recession in the not too distant future here locally as well. So looking specifically at industries that were hard hit, this was every shock that we see that causes a recession isn't sort of an equal opportunity offender, right? There's, the last one disproportionately hit wood products, which was a big deal here, continues to be a big deal here. It hit construction really hard, right, as we had a national collapse of the housing market. And this shock was also not an equal opportunity offender. When we're looking at the lines that are green, that is what employment looks like this November compared to what they were in 2019. And the golden ones, or yellow, are what the employment numbers were in November of 2020 compared to November 2019. So basically, you can see like the middle of the pandemic and then where we were today. And there are really three categories of industries that were hit by this shock. There were first the types of industries that really had no impact by it. weren't affected for the most part. I mean, they definitely had to deal with things, masking and social distancing and all that, but they didn't see job losses. Those two are the ones at the very top of the list here, you can see, which are mining, logging, construction. That's basically just construction for all of us here. Logging is relatively small as far as payroll employment goes. Construction, which we know how the housing market's been, right? We've continued to see pretty aggressive home price appreciation. The demand for housing is up. Builders are building homes. We didn't see a big drop there, or any drop or impact on the construction front. And that's true here in Klamath, because these are Klamath numbers, not just statewide. The other industry that didn't really see much of an impact from the pandemic was retail trade. There's been much discussion about how awesome our heroes are in the grocery industry, right? Because they've managed to stay open and continue to feed us, and we're thankful for that. And retail, for the most part, has done really well, especially in our rural communities, because retail tends to be heavier on those essential services, and also big box stores, et cetera. And so those are the two industries that weren't really impacted too much. Then we have those industries that were impacted by the pandemic but have already bounced back from what they were before. So in that category, we have manufacturing, which is really critical for us because manufacturing is such a critical employer here in the Klamath Basin. Was hard hit, but has already bounced back. Once again, that has a lot to do with housing demand nationally being up, so the demand for wood products is back up as well. People are buying windows and doors and all of the things that you put in a house. The other category of hard hit but has bounced back, you see, is other services. Think here, personal care services. These are, hair and beauty. For a while there, a lot of us could go without getting our haircuts. But then after the spouse doing the haircut for about a year, we're all like, yeah, it's time to go back to the beauty salon. So, I just got my haircut, and it looks so much better than how my wife would do it. She has a great heart, but she's a nurse, not a hair person. So we've all gone back to doing some of those normal personal care services. So those industries have bounced back. And then lastly are those industries that were hard hit and are continuing to struggle to bounce back for us. And the elephant in the room here for us all is leisure and hospitality, right? We all know how restaurants were shut down, and it's been sort of a slow trickle seeing that come back. Depending on where you're at, we've actually seen visitation, and from a tourism perspective, bounce back relatively quickly. Places like Deschutes County, or even here in the Klamath Basin, like visitors at Crater Lake National Park, or you look at some of these other amenities that people are visiting, those visitation numbers look great. People are back and they're going into these outdoor recreational meccas. The problem is they're not spending money in the same way they did before, right? They're not necessarily going to the hotel. Maybe they're camping instead. Or they're getting an Airbnb, which doesn't support payroll employment either. So you're seeing a little bit of a change in the way that people interact with the economy. The visitors are still there. They're just not spending in the same way. So that's caused a bit of a lag in the bounce back there. But I think that's going to come back. And you'll see information is here at the bottom. Information for us is a very confusing industry, but think of it as movie theaters, which we know what happened to movie theaters recently. They're still just now starting to get a little bit of a comeback. And then also news media is included under here. So that's been kind of hard hit. Data centers, but we don't have any data centers. So anyways, that's a small industry for us anyway, so you don't have to be too concerned there. And then the other one that was hard hit and continues to not see much recovery is transportation, warehousing, utilities, as well as education. The transportation, warehousing, utilities one is important. For us in the Klamath Basin, that is a story of agriculture. So this is the direct impacts of the drought that we're seeing right here, is a lot of the transportation associated with the goods and services that are coming off of our farms and ranches. We saw big losses there, and we actually saw in 2021, so this last year, we actually saw further losses. So that's discouraging, although driving down from Bend this morning, it was very encouraging to see that we actually have cut snowbanks along 97, which it's been years since I remember coming down and seeing legitimate good snowbanks on 97. So hopefully we have a good water year and we could bounce back, but when we're talking about impacts from the drought and not just from COVID, that's where most of that is showing up there. And then education, finally, is just, it's struggled. I was just talking to Chip about it a second ago that traditionally our higher education, so OIT or KCC, they'd be countercyclical, meaning that when economic shocks happen, when you have recessions, you see people go back to school to retool for a new economy, for new jobs. But we so quickly rebounded, combined with the fact that the demand for labor is so high, that folks didn't really need to go back to school to find good jobs or higher paying jobs, whatever it might be. So they didn't get that countercyclical bump that we typically see in recessions. But fortunately, we also haven't seen like necessarily huge losses either there. It just, they didn't get the benefit that you typically see in recession. So let's talk about labor. So that's the employment landscape. That's what employment in local businesses looks like. A pretty encouraging trend there. But the conversation really quickly went from the recovery to people talking more specifically about labor and where the heck is all the labor at? Where are the workers at, right? I'm sure if we had like a show of hands, everyone's heard that, or asked that question themselves, or had someone ask them that question somewhere. So if we're actually looking at the sort of the most generic way of measuring the supply of labor out there, the unemployment rate, you're all familiar with it. It's just the number of unemployed people in a local economy as a share of the total labor force. You could see, wow, just skyrocketed during the pandemic, right? This is one of those unprecedented charts. We'll have a few of these unprecedented charts here in a second. We went up to 14% about here in Klamath County. Pretty dang impressive for how high that was in like a 1 month period of time. Just crazy, from 6% or 5.8% to nearly 14%. Huge jump there. But really quickly, this trend improved. So much so that as of November of 2021, so once again, the most recent data we have available, the unemployment rate in Klamath County is down to 6%. So we are nearly identical unemployment today. Well, I should say, where we're standing today, with this, I could guarantee we'll be below the pre-pandemic level by the time we get our January numbers out, especially because we have a little bit of a leading indicator of what's happened nationally already. And we know that the trend here is just as good. So we are standing today with lower rates of unemployment than we had before the pandemic, which is just phenomenal news if you're a worker, because it means your labor is more valuable today. It is a tough situation if you're a business trying to hire, though. And if we change gears and look specifically just at the number of unemployed people, so this is the unemployment rate, but just the sheer volume of unemployed workers. And I indexed it so we could put the state on there as a comparison. So you can see that our rise in the number of unemployed workers in Klamath County didn't rise as fast as the states did. That's for a variety of reasons. One was the pandemic impacts, losses weren't quite as significant. Also has something to do with the industry composition there. Also, these estimates are notoriously bad, so there's a little bit of margin in there as well. But if we look at where we've got today, the actual volume of statistically unemployed workers, this isn't people on unemployment insurance, these are folks who are currently seeking work and not working. That's all it takes to be unemployed. So like a new graduate from high school or college who enters the workforce who doesn't qualify for unemployment insurance, they could be statistically unemployed because they don't have a job yet and they're looking. Anyways, that volume of available unemployed workers is exactly at the pre-pandemic level. So we have no excess unemployment any longer. There's no longer any slack in the labor market from an unemployment perspective today. The state's catching up. They're just a little bit behind us here, but we've depleted our supply quicker than the state has of available workers. Now, if we change gears again, and now we zoom in at an even smaller subset, now if we're looking just at those people on unemployment insurance benefits. Now, unemployment insurance benefits got a lot of attention the last 2 years. I'm sure many of you are familiar with some of the changes that happened through the CARES Act. UI benefits were expanded to be longer so that you could be on it longer than your traditional amount of time. Unemployment insurance benefits were expanded to populations that traditionally didn't have access to benefits. So that high school student or college student who just graduated and were going to enter the labor market, they did qualify for benefits. Someone who was self-employed, a consultant, whatever, they got to have opportunities to have unemployment insurance benefits. And then also the amount of money that you made, everyone was familiar with the boost, right? That extra $300, well, depending on what period we're talking about, but that extra $300 a month. Wait, was it a month? I'm now confusing myself. Weekly. Thank you, Randy. A week, yeah. Way more generous than it was previously. So it was more generous, and it was longer, and a larger population of people were allowed to get those benefits. As a result, you can see what happened to the number. This is Klamath County actual people on UI benefits. We jumped to nearly 2,600 folks in Klamath County who are on UI benefits in that first 2 months there. We were at, what is that, before the pandemic? Like 600. It's getting cut off on the side there. We were around 600 people. So we jumped by like 2,000. 421% increase, which just sounds insane, year over year from what the 2019 levels were. Here's what's pretty wild. I mean, this number tracks really closely with what we just saw here with the total statistical unemployed. We fell dramatically. And long before those benefits expired, by the way. I think there was this perception that we weren't going to see people sort of come back to the labor market and look for work until those generous benefits expired. They expired, is there a laser pointer on this thing? They expired right there. in September 2021. And so there is a distinct bump where we get like about an extra 200 people drop off unemployment insurance in that period of time, in that September range. But up until then, this huge drop in the summer period here was a reflection of that really strong hiring and the really strong labor market of businesses trying to get back in the high demand that we've had. Ultimately, that sort of hope that we would get all these extra workers looking for work when those benefits expired never really came to fruition because, like I said, locally, in the entire county, that was 200 people, which doesn't move the dial that much. Where we're sitting today, the number of folks on unemployment insurance benefits is well below what it was in 2019 before the pandemic. So just once again, just a wild swing back and forth that we've had here. So that's the labor side. But labor is really only one side of the equation when we're talking about the labor market. The other side is the demand for labor, right? So we now know that the supply is no bigger than what it was before the pandemic. We basically recovered back to the same number of unemployed. But what looks different today is that demand side. And so what we're looking at is labor demand as measured by help wanted ads, job ads in the local economy. So these are your guys' businesses, all the job ads that are out there added together for each month. And it's a 12-month moving average to make it a little smoother because it's quite a jumpy graph if you don't do that. So it actually lags. The actual current numbers through December are actually the highest they've ever been on record for Klamath County for any December. But the smooth graph, it's not quite at record level as you can see here yet. But really, really high rates of hiring that are out there. So this is one of the reasons why it feels like such a tight labor market today is the supply is low and that demand is really, really through the roof today. And if you put these together, the supply of labor as measured by unemployed workers, and you take that as a ratio with the supply or the demand for jobs out there. So the number of unemployed workers per job ad is this graphic that we're looking at here. That is really the best way to quantify like what the labor market conditions feel like or look like in a particular time and place. And you can see before the pandemic began, we were sitting at roughly like a 2.5 unemployed workers per job ad, okay? Depending on your economy, that number can be what's normal is higher or lower than that. Places like Deschutes County, it's been down in the 1.5 range, really aggressive there. But for our local economy, 2.5 is a pretty normal, tight labor market. You can see that number spiked to 7.7. The number that was that huge surge in unemployed workers. So it meant there were way more unemployed workers per job ad out there. But as we've seen the number of unemployed come down in that huge growth in the demand for workers, we're sitting today, as of November, on that 12-month moving average. It's cut off there, but about 3.2. And if you weren't looking at the 12-month moving average, if you were looking at just the monthly number, it's 2.4. So we are completely back to the tightest labor market statistically we've ever seen in Klamath County's history, or at least recent history with recent data. So we'll say the last 20 years. Incredibly tight labor market when we're looking at this statistically. We recently finished our 10-year industry projections and occupational projections. We do this every 2 years. We update them looking into the future. I don't put a lot of stock or weight into our projection for the aggregate number for the total non-farm level, which actually looks pretty good for us here in Klamath County. You can see we're expected to be up over 27,000 jobs, non-farm jobs in Klamath. Before the pandemic it was about 25,000, so a net increase of over 2,000 over that 10-year period of time. Really sort of getting us, this is where I was talking about, I'm pretty confident that we will not only recover from this COVID shock really soon, but I think that there's momentum here that will carry us into fully recovering from the Great Recession back in 2008 and actually move into like a true expansionary period again. And there are a few reasons why I'm optimistic about that. I think one is we're going to continue to see sort of modest increases on the population front. I think that there's perhaps some extra weight that we should be seeing on the population numbers, some of the quality of life things, mobility things that might happen that Josh said haven't happened yet, right? We haven't seen a lot of COVID mobility or quality of life movement yet, but I think that those sort of, the prognosis for Klamath has always been positive in that regard, that if people were able to work remote, able to choose where they want to live, that someplace like Klamath, a lot of places in our rural communities in Oregon, as long as they have internet, are able to be really competitive to attract those workers. That's a good thing. But it also comes with a challenge, right? Because in a lot of ways, a remote worker is not much different than a retiree. Yes, they're participating in the labor market. That's good. But they're participating in someone else's labor market, right? They're filling a job that's in San Francisco or filling a job that's in Seattle, but they're doing it here in Klamath, or they're doing it in Bend, or they're doing it in Medford, wherever they might be. That's good because we're bringing those dollars from those high-value metropolitan areas into our rural communities, and they're spending those dollars, and that's supporting our local economy, just like a tourist might, or just like a retiree might be spending that retirement income. And so that's going to drive demand for goods and services, all really good stuff. The problem is because they're not really contributing to the local labor market, the biggest headwind for us in Klamath is going to be labor. It is going to be, where do we find the workers to meet this demand? The demand is not the concern that I have in the future. And so, like I said, the remote workers are like a short-term good thing, but you're like, maybe you get them here and then you can persuade them to work for a local employer. But ultimately, I think that is going to be one of the challenges of that group, is they'll be pushing demand higher and not being local contributors to the local labor supply. Josh already hit a lot of the demographic stuff, so I won't touch on that at all. But definitely our headwind is demographics, aging population, figuring out ways to keep young people here and recruit working age families to move to the community to fill those jobs that are going to be here. Those businesses are hiring, they have the jobs. We just need the people to fill those butts and seats, right? So with that, I am done, and I don't think we're doing questions right now, are we? No. We are not. So thank you so much. Good to see you all in person again.
Hopefully everyone got a flyer here, and we're going to do a test here, a real quick quiz. No, I was just kidding. But each one of them has a note, a place where you can write notes, comments, questions. We will be collecting these at the end of today's session, and look forward to hearing your thoughts on this economic summit. Today it's my pleasure to introduce Allison Smith, part of Team Klamath. Allison is part of RARE, Resource Assistance for Rural Environments. She's a member of this, God, I can't believe you wrote this out, but SCOED, South Central Oregon Economic Development District. Her primary role is to identify and organize economic recovery, migration, and resiliency initiatives for Klamath and Lake County. Before RARE, she spent 5 years working as a business consultant in industry, assisting organizations with human capital projects such as change management, human-centered design, and training as a facilitator. She has a passion for the rural economy, rural communities, and development work, and helping others prepare to overcome change. And as we all know, change is not a four-letter word if it's spelled correctly. So with that, I'd like to introduce Allison Smith. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Yes, I have to say resource assistance for rural environments at SCOED, South Central Oregon Economic Development District, pretty much every day. So thank you, Randy, for trying. Again, hi everyone, I'm Allison Smith. I am the Rural Economic Recovery and Resiliency Specialist with SCOED. For those of you who don't know, RARE, Resource Assistance for Rural Environments, is an AmeriCorps program that is specifically for rural Oregon communities. So we are placed into communities throughout the state, and we help communities with capacity building and other technical assistance. And I am fortunate enough to be part of SCOED. I started with the program last year, and I'm continuing this year, which is a very exciting time just because I can take some of the work that I did last year and continue it this year, which is what I will be talking about today. Just a little bit about SCOED for those of you who don't know. We're kind of the regional conduit for economic development resources. We cover Klamath County, but we also help with our neighbors to the east, Lake County. And we really just want to see a thriving economy rooted in our local resources. Part of this is usually we have to do every 5 years a comprehensive economic development strategy, or the SEDS. And economic recovery and resiliency are always really a part of this process. And that's kind of where my role also comes in. Similar to what Damon was talking about, I'm not going to talk too much about COVID and its inception. I think all of us pretty much know what happened, especially with our economy, our health, and just social aspects. But But I do want to note that one of the best things that happened was the initial fiscal assistance for a lot of people here in our communities. So this was just immediate money resources that were flooding into households and businesses. With that said, we also wanted to make sure that we were understanding some of the root causes. We know that some of this fiscal assistance, it's not going to be around forever. It's not necessarily sustainable. And so my role, and then SCOED discussed the possibility of completing something like a needs assessment so we could better understand what was happening in the community, especially in our economy, as it relates to the pandemic. So that is where I come in with this needs assessment. I'll go over a little bit about what it is and how we did it, and then I'll jump into some of the findings. To start, I was not alone in this process, so there were actually 6 other RARE AmeriCorps members in other economic development districts across the state of Oregon. So 6 of us were actually doing this assessment. We of course catered our specific district assessments to where the regions that we were in. So I was obviously doing it for Klamath and Lake counties, but other RAREs were doing it for their counties and regions as well. This was really helpful because we could collaborate and coordinate on many different aspects of the needs assessment process. We actually conducted this assessment back last year. It's hard to believe that it was a year ago. This is actually the first time I am presenting this information in person, which I think is quite astounding from where we were last year. So we started this process in December, but really kicked it off in January of 2021, and it went through March. And I want to pause here just to make sure that to provide a little bit more context with this, is all the information that I'm going to explain is from January 2021 to March 2021. And so a lot of this is, there's room for change, adoption, shifting. So please just keep that in mind as I go over some of the findings. They're pretty much almost a year old at this point. To do this, we as in the RAREs in the Economic Development District, decided that how we were going to conduct this needs assessment was essentially interview local stakeholders from a variety of different industries, and then also collect anecdotal information and or data. And we already heard a lot about the economic data from both Josh and Damon, but a lot of that was also taken into account in this needs assessment. And the whole reason why we wanted to do this was because we wanted to figure out the shorter and longer term needs of our community so that we could identify resources and then develop activities, projects, initiatives that could address or mitigate some of those needs here in Klamath and Lake counties. So for the process in itself, we, the RARE cohort, decided to come together, make the interview questions, some of the templates that we use, like email requests, interview answer storage, data collection. We worked together on that to kind of alleviate some of the work in the upfront piece. But of course we catered most of the interview questions depending on who we were talking to. In the end, SCOED, I interviewed 21 stakeholders from a variety of industries, and then I also collected a decent amount of anecdotal information from news reports, articles, and then also some data and statistics and trends, so unemployment, labor force participation, even some mental health statistics. All of this, so the interviews and then the data that was collected was pulled into a district-specific report. So SCOED has a specific needs assessment report that outlines the high-level themes, needs, and data. It also has a section for opportunities, so potential recommendations that not just SCOED, but others can use to try and help mitigate and address some of those needs that were outlined in the report as well. In addition, so SCOED obviously has their own needs assessment report, and other districts across the state do. And so with the help of RARE staff and University of Oregon, we were able to compile a statewide report highlighting some of the similar trends and themes across those who did a needs assessment. So we're still putting a little bow on that, and it will be ready to go soon, but there is a full statewide report highlighting what we heard in each of our districts. So I don't expect you, this is super tiny, I just want to give you a very high-level glimpse at kind of what the findings were. So before I jump into the findings, again, I do want to say that this was from last year, so some of this may have changed. Additionally, we're not really in full recovery yet. So we're still in a pandemic and things are ever evolving. So I will caveat some of these findings with that. Additionally, I think that some of the statistics that we've already gone over explain this, but Klamath and Lake did relatively well during the pandemic. I mean, every single county in the state, every single county in the country obviously went through tumultuous times during the pandemic, especially in the beginning, but we are doing relatively okay. And all of the interviews that I had noted that, and they described how really fierce and helpful this community was for a lot of people going through very tough times. So while I note a lot of needs on here, there was also a lot of good things that we can take going forward to help us prepare for other economic disruptions. So for start, the color coding on this graph are just the themes. Themes were highlighted throughout the interview process and also the data gathered, which basically just kind of boils down what we heard. So capacity challenges, or technical assistance, or mental health. Within the graphic are the voiced needs that I heard the most. So these are things such as capacity and funding, broadband, business and workforce technical assistance, messaging and communication, plans and preparedness, things along those lines. And unfortunately, with the time that I have today, I can't dive into each and every one. And if you are interested in learning a lot more about each need, feel free to contact me, or you can read the report. But I do want to go over 4 in particular today. These 4 needs I heard in every single interview. And also it is supported by plenty of data. So the first one that I want to go over is business and workforce technical assistance. So what I heard pretty much throughout my interviews simply was, if small businesses and companies were doing a bit better before the pandemic, they fared better during the pandemic. So what this means is essentially that those who had robust financial and accounting systems, those who were able to pivot and go online, even before the pandemic, therefore they did better during the pandemic. And I want to be clear with the interviewees who mentioned this, that they weren't saying that just because a business doesn't have those particular opportunities doesn't mean that they deserve to flop or to suffer by any means. What they were saying is that there's an opportunity here to help provide small businesses specific technical assistance, especially around digital, financial, and operational literacy, so that if something like this were to happen again, or something such as, a recession, even before this pandemic, maybe they can fare a little bit better. Thankfully, we do have resources here in the community that help with that. We have the Small Business Development Center, we have the Klamath Idea. But to my next point, with the capacity, sometimes we just need a little bit more resources to come together and actually help with this technical assistance. So I will jump to the capacity as well. I'm sure I don't have to tell you that you all probably wear many different hats in your job. You do a lot of different things, and a lot of people are glad to do it. They want to help their community. They want to contribute to the community. They want to contribute to the workforce or their business. But the pandemic has showed us that this is quite exhausting, and we saw a lot of burnout. So there were more retirements. There were more job shiftings. And there really wasn't any necessarily solutions to this throughout the interviews that I had, but there was mention of trying to focus more on specific resources? How can we get access to a grant writer who can help us with some of the stuff that we don't have time for on the side? Broadband, I heard it in every single interview. Klamath Falls proper here is doing okay, depending on what you can and cannot afford. But a lot of the smaller, more remote, rural frontier communities are really struggling with this. The pandemic showed that, we shifted pretty much everything online, whether it was our communication or our schooling. And so this really highlighted the fact that some people do not have access to the necessary broadband. And even if they do, sometimes it's so slow that they can't actually be productive. And lastly, and again, I'm sure I don't have to tell you this, but the pandemic had a significant impact on our mental health and our youth. Closing of schools, no extracurriculars obviously had some mental health impacts on students. I heard from university faculty that they had students who were truly almost straight A students, if not hovering around there, who were literally failing during the pandemic. And I don't mean by just going a grade down, I mean literally an F, which didn't really make sense. So this clearly had a significant impact on the well-being of students and youth, but also the workforce and those of us just in the community. This was a lot to take in, and going forward, we'll have to prioritize mental health as we recover. The last thing that the needs assessment covers is potential opportunities, not just for SCOED, but for maybe SCOED and partners to possibly implement to mitigate and address some of those needs that I just talked about. One of which is just that whole business technical assistance again, so partnering with those who are already doing this work and providing extra support so that businesses can be better equipped in times of distress, especially in a disruption in the economy. Another one I heard a lot, a need that I didn't necessarily go over with you all, but people are very interested in figuring out how to prepare for stuff like this again, whether it is economic recession or whether it's a natural disaster. How can we actually incorporate some of these opportunities or recovery efforts into our emergency plans so that we can be better equipped for future disruption? Another one that I heard a lot was that partnerships and collaborations were absolutely key during the pandemic for everybody. So nonprofits, businesses, all trying to get together to try and figure out how to either get money out the door or assist some others as they tried to recover as well. And so how can we continue those partnerships and collaborations going forward? It obviously worked out very well, so how can we continue that? Is it, we meet quarterly to figure out all of our projects and see where each organization can plug in, things like that. Additionally, broadband, as I mentioned, this was a definite opportunity that everyone was very excited about to continue going forward. I know SCOED is trying to support broadband efforts, and a bunch of other organizations are too. So this is something that is very tangible that we can continue going forward and address with organizations in our community. And lastly, there was highlights of just inequities were unveiled, community reach and education was a little bit difficult during this time. So how can we partner with some of the people who hadn't heard this information before or feel left out of the conversation, especially when it comes to businesses and trying to figure out how to stay afloat or be prepared for economic distressors in the future? So how can we partner with them more and build trust? And I will say with the opportunities, these are ideas. No names are attached to these, and throughout the year, things have shifted a little bit. Things have been added for implementation, and some of these might go away. The last thing I will say is that if you want to know a little bit more about the specific themes and needs that I briefly went over, the needs assessment report is on SCOED's website, and It's around 20 to 30 pages, and it kind of goes over not only the theme, but the need, and then the data supporting that, and especially some interview quotes that we heard. Again, this is a year old, so things are continuing to shift. I do want to just, on a final note, say that 21 interviews and some of that data, it's not all encompassing. So there were some industries that we were not able to get a hold of, so to interview, and so not all of these themes and needs are, they're not the full picture. There are still some people that we need to talk to and continue to engage with as we look to recovery and resiliency. But I will leave you with that. Thank you so much for your time, and please let me know if you have any questions, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Allison. We're going to take a brief break right now. It's approximately 10:13. We'll be reseating and getting the panel assembled at 10:25.
All right, well, welcome back, those of us that could, or those of you rather, that could stay for this second part of the event. We will wrap up in just about an hour, but we did want to take some time to get some more local perspective and to also have the opportunity for questions from the audience. And I have some questions teed up as well that Quesida and I worked through, but we really hope to hear from you and hear your questions and comments. I know many of you and none of you are shy that I know, so I fully expect that you will ask great questions. I do want to do a brief introduction of our panelists, and I'm going to keep them very brief because we've all been in those situations where you start hearing about what someone was doing in 10th grade, and I know nobody really wants to go too deep on this, and frankly, most of you probably know most of these people. And I also do want to just again thank our sponsors. I think Randy Shaw had to step away, but we were going to give him the opportunity to kind of ceremoniously offer the first question, but I think he had to step away, so we'll just go ahead and jump right in. So you already know our two gentlemen from this morning. Next is Lauren Jespersen. Most of you probably know Lauren, but he's born and raised in Klamath. He is the past president of Quesida, and now he's with Sky Lakes. Next to him, we have Jesse DeBose, a really dear friend of mine, and yet where am I seeing your bio, Jesse? I'll just tell you what I know about Jessie. You don't want to mess with her. She's very awesome. No, I'm kidding. Well, I'm not kidding. That's actually true, but there we go. Jessie is the project manager from the Southern Oregon Educational Service District and also longtime Klamath Falls. Next to Jessie, Paul Simmons, the executive director of the Klamath Water Users Association, or in other words, for our purposes, our water expert of the morning. Next to him, Allison York, our realtor, and she actually does real estate for the county as well, and the principal broker for Windermere. And then finally, Chad Only, and Chad, did I pronounce that right? Is it Only? Okay. And Chad is with us. He's been working in credit unions for 17 years, lots of fiscal expertise at the end of the table. So with that, we will jump into questions. I do want to open it up to the audience first in case there's something that you've been dying to ask. And then, like I said, I have questions as well. So is there anyone in the audience who wants to kick us off? Anyone? Larry? Oh, Larry, please.
Yeah. What is it about Klamath's economy that makes it appealing for growth? And what should we continue doing in terms of the assets that we have?
So we'll do it this way, at least for this question. Why don't we hear from each panelist? On some of them, it'll be very obvious that there's someone with expertise, and we'll go to them first, and then if anyone else wants to jump in. But Chad, why don't we start at your end?
All right. I guess we'll pass the mic here. So, thanks for asking an easy question. I can speak a little bit from personal experience. 15 years ago, I set out a roadmap of the type of community I wanted to live in and raise my children in. And Klamath Falls fit the bill to a T. And so it was a long road to get here, but we got here, and couldn't be happier being here. But, you know, what makes it appealing for economic growth going forward? You know, for me, the question is more about, you know, what specific types of growth are appealing. You know, because there's lots of different parts of growth out there. And for me, it's what type of growth. And, you know, it's interesting talking to some people from Bend that were there before things really took off. And they said, be careful what you wish for, and be very specific about what you wish for, and be very intentional about it. And so I think the conversation for us is not how do we be somebody else, but how do we be the best version of Klamath Falls? And so you look around and think what makes us great. It's the natural resource base that we have, obviously. It is a blue collar, roll up your sleeves, get things done kind of a place that deals frankly with reality. And so how do we continue to build on that? How do we continue to reinforce that? How do we have a balanced economy? You know, I think one of our greatest opportunities right now is that the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Oregon was severely disrupted and nationally disrupted by COVID. And so how do we get back to where we've got an ecosystem that supports and develops the next generation of businesses that give us a balanced economy where we aren't reliant or dependent upon a single industry, but have diversity in industry going forward and support the growth of those new businesses and the next generation.
I would echo Chad's comments about our natural resources. I think that the reason that you live in Klamath Falls is because you like the outdoors, and walking a mall isn't your first choice of activity. I think that we need to continue that and expand on that. And right now, Klamath is looking particularly good, especially if you drive through the metro areas of Oregon. When we have clients that are coming into town and they want a community tour, we're looking really, really good. And it's nice to hear their positive comments about what a beautiful area we live in, what great outdoor activities we have, what our downtown is looking like. That's been years in the works. My mom and Rich Bogatay started on the Downtown Improvement District probably 20 years ago. And as that's continued with recent groups who've gotten together and put in the local parks, we've had the facade improvements, and we have some increased downtown living right now. It's a very attractive place. I think locally we are challenged to see that sometimes, but if we stop and take a look around and listen to the outsiders, and if we ourselves talk about the positive benefits of our area, it will go a really long ways. As far as real estate and the infrastructure that we have moving forward, we have a really large UGB or urban growth boundary. Our developers come in and go, wow, your roads are in place. We have the upper bypass, the south side bypass, a nice network of roads. Sometimes we hear locally that government is hard to deal with, but I'm here to tell you that if you talk to somebody who tries to develop in California or Bend or Portland, we are really easy. We have a community that's pulling together to try and work together to bring business in, to help growth, and that's a very refreshing for people from the outside. Our benefits are we've got KCC and Oregon Tech. I could keep going on, but I better move this on.
I can't really improve on either of those answers, and I'm not an expert, but I will say this. You know, I come at this it's also sort of personal, from a perspective of someone who used to come here, and so for 20 years I came here and visited and did work, and then went home to California. And now I have a place here, and I am kind of a bit of a dual resident, but I don't know how one does it, but to help others appreciate just how much there is here when they aren't of here is, to me, a real challenge. And I know that's what Casita and Chamber are sort of all about, but now that I'm here so much, I mean, I can't believe really the natural assets. And I had been to Link River Dam. I had no idea how cool Link River Trail was. And you know, so, and the public parks and the El Redkey Pool and everything else that there is here. So that's the key, is having people. I mean, that speaks nothing of the economy, but I think we're in a world now where so many people are able to live where they want to live, and certainly that relates to the teleworkers and what the nature of those jobs. But I really think that is a huge upside potential for the city of Klamath Falls and Klamath County myself.
And I'll answer in terms of the school's perspective. So I think the first part of your question was, how are we well posed, and then how can we improve, more or less. When people include schools in economic improvement or development conversations, it's usually in one of two ways: workforce development and workforce readiness, or in appeal for recruiting businesses or workers. As far as those two ways are concerned, I think we are extremely well poised. We have, it's a long list of programs where we are the cutting edge of the state, if not the nation, on workforce readiness and workforce development. Our school systems are, our two school districts are fantastic, and I think we have a lot of appeal, because even those remote workers, while they might not be a part of our job market, they're participating in our economy, and they want to be involved in our schools, usually if they're of family age. The third way that isn't often talked about with schools is its role, with the K through 12 schools, is its role in family stability. And that is hand in hand with a productive labor force to be able to have family stability, and that's something that we learned a lot in the pandemic, is what schools do as far as providing that family stability. So I think one way that we need to be very conscious of and very intentional about is looking how we can have stability in the school environment so that we can have stability in the family environment. We can't get workers to come off unemployment insurance and go back to a two-worker household if you don't know if your kids are going to be able to go to school, or if you have to homeschool a kindergartner or help them online. And as far as the workforce readiness part, you don't want 13, 14, 15-year-olds, once they're legally able to babysit, having to stay home with younger siblings and not be able to be in the schools. So I think that is something to keep a keen eye on. I do think as a community, we're so far ahead of the ball on this one, because we have some very key public-private and business-school partnerships that are just amazing. So.
I like to think of our economic future and I try to break it out into two ways. Things that we can control and things that we can't control. So a lot of the macroeconomics that affect us, we really can't control those components. So I try to remind myself, and when we sit around the table with the executive committee for Casita, we try to remind ourselves of the things that we can control, or the things that we can influence. And I look around this room and I see a lot of resources in this room. And we have a lot of very smart business people in this room. We have a lot of financial resources. And that's one of the things that I think Casita has been trying to do over the last 12 years, that we've been trying to convene more resources. Yeah, we have a lot of natural resources. We have a lot of beauty in this community. But we've had a lot of developers come and go that have worked in silos. And so we've been trying to make sure that as we look towards the future of Klamath, we try to control what we can, and we try to pool the resources in an intentional way that helps us reach the goals of creating a community that is still the Klamath Falls that we all want it to be. We're not trying to be somebody else, but we have so much potential, and we have a lot of resources that we still have not tapped. And I think the more we get very good information shared with us that helps us all understand that it's not just this gut feeling that Klamath is at this tipping point and we're heading in the right direction. We keep hearing evidence that shows us that now is the time. we have the opportunity to pull the trigger on some really, what used to be really risky investments, now they're just really smart investments. All of us in this room that have the opportunity to invest in this community, we're all going to be better off in the future if we pull the trigger now. And if you don't do it, you're going to be thinking, gosh, I wish I'd invested 10 years ago. Because everybody that lives in Bend and has lived there for the last 30 years that didn't invest 20 years ago, they're kicking themselves. And we'll be kicking ourselves too if we don't start thinking the way that we should. And we should be being more bold in our investments in this community.
So just listening to the conversations this morning, I think it's important to highlight from research-based, right? Like, why do people choose where they want to live, right? Or why do they choose to live where they do? The answer is simply really three things in order. It's jobs, housing, and quality of life, right? We're going to move somewhere where we can find a job and pay the bills. We'd like to do it someplace that we can afford to do it too. And then if we can't afford after the fact, have a high quality of life, right? So those sort of dynamics, we call it the housing trilemma in our office. And those are really key to understanding a lot of the things that we care about as a community. And so I continue to focus on those things. The housing supply seems to sound really great coming from a state, a whole coast, that is housing constrained where we haven't built enough housing. So having the capacity to add that to accommodate both current needs and future needs for a growing population is huge. And not all of our communities have that. And some of our communities, frankly, like it that way, unfortunately, and they don't want more neighbors, and they don't want to grow, and so that's a huge problem. But if we have that locally, that is a benefit. And on the quality of life, the other thing that this is my first time in downtown Klamath, is this downtown is a huge community asset, just in terms of the structures and the storefronts and, the main street and the like. And I think about some of the other towns in Oregon that have transformed and reinvented themselves since the decline of logging and lumber more broadly in the last 2 generations, frankly. I think about places like Hood River. I think about places like Astoria. More recently, McMinnville. Those are all closer to Portland, so you have 2.5 million people that are an hour away. That certainly helps. But they have the downtowns, they have the urban cores, for lack of a better word, and it's a huge community asset that people want to be there, and then they visit, and they're like, hey, I could live here, this is fantastic. And then now, obviously, the outdoor activities and the natural amenities are huge. And people, once they come and realize that, they're like, I'm going to stay here, I want to live here, I want to raise my kids here, I want to grow my business here, that sort of thing. So I think that all is here in place, certainly. And so then capitalizing on it would be huge.
Well, there's not much to add to that because that's all amazing answers. The only thing I'll say on the quality of life side, that's the piece that I've always stuck to with Klamath is that it has quality of life amenities, has had for as long, Bend and Klamath look the same for all intents and purposes, and a lot of people move to Bend for quality of life reasons, and Klamath has all the same attributes. And one thing that's important to remember is it was sort of the famed, goofy economist Ed Whitelaw, who was a University of Oregon professor in the late 70s, early 80s, coined this term, the second paycheck. And he was sort of ahead of the curve with identifying sort of the role quality of life plays in economic development. He also was thinking of it more from an ecosystem services perspective, but also as far as what we want and where we live, and sort of hitting on that third part of the trifecta that Josh was talking about there. And you can think of your first paycheck as literally the paycheck that you pay your bills with, right? Like you get your money from your employer or from sales, whatever, that's your normal paycheck. But the second paycheck is this idea of where you live gives you something. There's some value living where you live. Maybe for those of us, we're so outdoors focused in the Pacific Northwest. I try to give a non-Pacific Northwest example. Like if you love theater or something like that, then New York City might have a huge second paycheck to you, value, because you would be willing to give up some of your first paycheck because you have such a love for the theater and they have just this great theater scene, right? If you're someone who loves the outdoors, loves to fish, loves to hunt, loves to ski, loves to whatever it might be, well, man, those communities of ours in Oregon, east of the Cascades, really give you a huge second paycheck. And so understanding sort of what our second paycheck is here and not biting the hand that feeds us, right? Understand we don't want to jeopardize that second paycheck. Now, not everybody values those things that we have as attributes here. but not, you know, wanting to sort of burn that bridge and make sure that we protect the things that make us special and that people value when they come here to visit and also when they move here to live. So.
Kelly, I've got a kind of a follow-up
Yeah,
real
great.
quick, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I'm a numbers guy, so this is to the economist. Housing, as a percentage of housing costs as a percentage of your income. Is there a sweet spot to where a community grows and more labor force comes in, and then eventually, if it gets too high, labor force stops coming to the
I would say the answer is in terms of when it hits the point where it turns people off, is a lot higher than you would think, right? Just, I think our neighbors to the south in California are the cautionary tale. The adjustments you see is you see very, very low vacancy rates. You see rising household size, more roommates, less people living on their own as you try and accommodate for that. But I mean, you're paying easily, certainly in the Bay Area. So if you think about the last decade, California, the Bay Area had some of the worst housing affordability in the entire country. It got worse every year. They were still growing their economy, like 3% job growth, right? Which is faster than the state of Oregon. Like, they were still booming economically despite not building housing, despite having the worst affordability and the like. So that threshold of people are willing to stomach it is much, much higher than you would think. Now, on the flip side, on the very affordable places, a lot of times the very affordable places are so low price because they don't have the demand, and the housing is older stock and hasn't been kept up. And so frankly, it counts as a vacant unit, but it's kind of dilapidated and you don't really want to live in it. And so balancing that, so to answer your question, I don't have an answer, but those other ends of the spectrum, those dynamics are a lot different than I think we think in our heads. So I don't know, kind of help.
Yes.
We have a pretty exciting project, I think, on the horizon known as the Swan Lake Pump Storage Project. And I think it's going to be a huge asset to the community. But how does the community take advantage of that throughout the construction phase and then beyond? Because it could be a game changer if we tap into that project, I think, as a community.
I mean, I can speak to Swan Lake, but I don't want to steal the mic the whole time. So do you guys have thoughts? Go ahead. I'll say one thing really quick about it. Yeah, you're hitting on, so the question was about Swan Lake, the pump storage facility. It's going to have some pretty impressive construction figures as far as both investment as well as employment numbers that come out of that on the construction phase. And then the question was sort of how do we sustain momentum with that? Because in any economic development project, when we're looking at sort of economic impact, you have sort of the construction phase always looks a lot glossier or sexier than the long term, especially manufacturing is a great example of that as well. And that's tough. I mean, ultimately, it probably isn't going to be a huge employer and will sustain itself pretty well. I think the long-term vision for something like that is that it shows that the Klamath Basin is going to be like a leader when it comes to energy storage, energy production. We have these transmission lines that run right through our region that are really critical to the whole Pacific Northwest and California. I think there's sort of long-term plays that go into that more than thinking just in this particular project that, similar to how Kirk County and Prineville have really tapped into data centers as being a niche for their community. Now, any individual data center isn't super impressive as far as the employment numbers, but you start to build them together. Now they've got, if you see these things, they're you can't multiple upon multiple upon multiple of football field size facilities. I mean, so there's hundreds and hundreds of jobs out there. Now it's starting to move the needle, right? Because they've sort of built this niche, and I think this might be an opportunity to sort of build a niche in the Klamath Basin as far as energy storage and tapping into energy production as well on the other end, whether that's solar or other wind, other sort of assets that we have in the region that are really untapped potential there. So, but yeah, those construction numbers will look great for a bit though, but it will dip off after that.
Anything else for that?
The one thing I would add on the construction phase, depending on how long it lasts, build apartments, don't do man camps, do apartments, so then you have that physical infrastructure for future growth as well.
Yeah, I think those are both really good points. So we've got a window, right? We've got 4 years during the construction phase of this. You've got a ramp up of employment for a while, and then it dips down. Most of those are going to be skilled labor jobs, journeyman level jobs. The direct employment will be of individuals who live here, and so we have an opportunity to say, okay, how do we have these people stay and spend their money here while they're here? And some of them will also, if the Klamath Basin appeals correctly, will decide, for that second paycheck to stay here long term. And so that builds our skill base that we need for future construction. And so there's an opportunity to attract that skilled labor and keep it, because they'll be coming here for a period of time anyway, and get to see if they actually want to settle down and plant roots here. So on the service side, we got to think about how do we serve these people while they're here, and how do we encourage a few of them to stick around once they're done with their part of the project.
Yeah, I wanted to add that I think it's very foreseeable, very, very reasonable to anticipate, and actually likely that there's going to be a ramp up on the construction, on the infrastructure side that will be sustained and that will reach new levels and maybe go further, because there is so much more around the horizon in terms of, especially what I know about, which is water-related infrastructure. And there are a couple of reasons that it's needed, and I'm speaking primarily from the irrigation side of things. But one is you have this phenomenon that's west-wide in the United States called aging infrastructure. So you have facilities here that are 100 years old, and so some of them need much more than a facelift, and it's a tall order. And you've started to see signs of that. If you go down 39 there, just in the Henley area, there's this new structure, this white tube, right? The sea siphon. So that was a $10 million project. That's $10 million. But that is just the tip of the iceberg for what's around the corner on water infrastructure around here. Of course, there's a project that's going to demolish some dams, and there's going to be construction work associated with that, and that's likely and that's probable, and that's not too far down the road from what I can tell. But in the other need in terms of the water infrastructure is not just the aging infrastructure, but the need to stretch every drop as far as it can possibly go, maximizing efficiencies and reuse of water and what have you. So there are some potential recycled water projects, for example, which involves using municipal wastewater again and again instead of putting it into the river. And then all of the major irrigation districts around here are engaged in some degree of planning associated with modifying, modernizing, and upgrading those systems, and that can include piping and everything else. So, this is recognized by Congress, and the infrastructure bill is somewhere between $8 and $9 billion for grants and loans for water infrastructure alone of the sort that we're talking about. Then you have these districts that are working with the federal government and the states, and an outfit from Hood River known as Farmers Conservation Alliance to do these system modernization plans. Those will come with opportunities for federal funding, up to 75% cost share funding. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars of construction here. And we're also well situated in Oregon because we have very well positioned members of Congress in terms of appropriators. So it's, as long as people still have water to use, there's a significant level of activity coming on that front. And actually, as I said, we've seen the tip of the iceberg, and it's a big iceberg.
I think the number of workers that will be here at the beginning of the Swan Lake project, it's going to be shocking to this community. It's going to feel more like a boom town, similar to a lot of the oil field towns for a while. I think what we, as a community, if we had been able to plan accordingly for this project, we would have been building apartment buildings and homes starting 5 years ago, because that's when we need it to start to keep up with the housing demand for what these construction projects are going to bring. I think what we need to look at is how we take advantage of that labor being here in this county, and try to leverage the fact that we have other projects we can take that labor and put them towards. I think that we have an opportunity for a lot of other energy projects, and I'm going to say something controversial here, but solar power is going to be a large player in the economy of Klamath County in the future, and with the lack of available water, a lot of growers are going to be growing solar instead of crops, and a lot of farmers don't like to think that way. But when you're looking at no crops or leasing your ground to a solar developer for several $100s per acre to have solar panels on your property, it's hard to say no to having the ability to put food on your table. But I think when the Swan Lake project comes online, it will become a hub for solar projects. So any potential solar project in this area will be that much more attractive because there is that available energy storage right here. And so it's possible that we can keep a lot of that labor here if we start building housing now.
Jim.
For Chad, representing sort of the financial community, I feel like there's a lack of access to capital investment in this community, and maybe it's just my own personal perspective, but going to what Lauren just said and what we all know, that we have a housing shortage, what's the lending community doing to help in this community facilitate investors and developers to begin developing this product?
And Chad, can you kind of summarize the question as you answer it for the...
I'll try and summarize that. So the question, in summary, I hope I get it right, is that what is the access to capital in order to do the development we need to do? I'm among friends, and so I'm going to speak frankly. One of the things that we have seen nationally over the last 2 decades is a consolidation of banks and credit unions nationwide. And so at its peak, just because I have this number in the top of my head, there was 213 credit unions in the state of Oregon. Today there's 56. And so in the last 20 years, you've seen that consolidation. Obviously, we've seen it in the bank space as well. And I don't have the data and the numbers for you on that, but South Valley is now part of WAFED, which is controlled out of Portland. And for instance, that's probably the recent and most biggest impact. And so I'm going to pick on a bank that doesn't exist anymore. That's Bank of the Cascades. And so back when Bank of the Cascades was around, as a publicly traded entity, they had to publish their strategic plan. And their strategic plan was we put branches in rural communities because people in rural communities tend to save more than people in urban areas. And then we've opened 2 loan production offices, one in Portland and one in Seattle, and we loan out the money there. So the question is access to capital. Yeah, it's tough in rural communities. You talk to somebody on the phone as opposed to, and they don't know your community. They may have never visited your community. And so for large projects that require large financial institutions to fund them, that becomes a challenge. If you want to put a skyscraper in Lakeview, we're not the institution to call. But for the smaller capital projects, yes. Casita, along with some partners, has done a great job of developing a housing fund, which is also growing contractors in this area and getting them from being contractors into being developers. Right? It's a process, and so the people who have invested in that fund, who are starting that process. You know, it's going to take several years to get us there, but it's taking the people and the expertise and building and developing that expertise internally. One of the challenges that we have is that, you know, the Bens and the Boise's took off before everybody else did in the last housing boom. And so if you were a contractor or you're a journeyman in some trade, you moved to where the jobs were. And so getting those people back is tough. And also those developers, the people with the money to come back is even tougher. The good news is that a lot of those communities are running out of shovel-ready lots. We have them. And so we are getting attention there. But I'm getting away from capital. So yes, local funds, local funding, awesome. There are things that we can do at Pacific Crest. We're still pretty small scale. We're, you know, if you compare us to like a Washington Federal, who's, you know, or an Umpqua Bank, who's 40 times our size. So we're doing what we can. We're thinking about it. We're talking about it. We're seeing how we can deploy it. Obviously, the housing fund is working as well. Part of it is we need to get better at how we communicate and how we're able to talk and present business plans to the larger institutions and do things at a scale that they want to see. And you know, the scale they want to see is 10 million. And so if your starting point is below that and you want to do development, it's you can't pick up the phone and call the Seattles of the world. So, does that kind of answer the question?
Yes, sir.
I have a question for the other panelists, I guess, but I think you hit the nail on the head here. I'm new here. I'm a fractional CFO, one of the California people that moved up here that has a virtual firm, but you can't seem to spend money here. So, I mean, we're talking about growth and growing it, but to have someone, even as a homeowner or a business owner, I mean, you're scheduling people for fall of 2022 to do work.
Yep.
So how do you, I mean, lending is the secondary problem, I think. How do we get the people here to do the work?
So whoever starts the question, whoever starts off, if you can kind of summarize for the way back.
Yeah, I don't understand.
It's a bit of the chicken and the egg, which comes first. We attract more people in development, we get more tradesmen in. Being in the real estate industry, if we have a repair to do, it's a challenge. And we better darn well be paying quickly and very well to our tradesmen to get it done in a quick fashion. We are starting to draw some out-of-town builders, which is the first time in a long time. Part of that is because we do have lots that are ready, and we have lots that are relatively still inexpensive, particularly compared to other areas. The cost of construction is a delay, is a concern, and so is the timing on it. I'm going to circle back a little bit to Jim's question and with Chad's. When it comes to on the commercial side, so that's where I kind of take a spin on it, and the downtown, it's worked really well to have a local lender such as Pacific Crest, where the decisions are made locally. That makes a really big difference compared to when you're working with a group whose decisions are based out of Seattle or Portland. They understand our differences here, which are very different than the metro areas or even in Medford. So if something looks like it makes sense, sometimes that's a lot of training on the person who has the good idea. There's a lot that goes into it. People go, I'm going to pick up this building and turn it into apartments. That's a long process and a lot more than most people anticipate. It's doable, but it takes a lot of partners in the process. It's a lot of coming together on a lot of different parts.
Anyone else?
Yeah, and as far as the workforce development goes, Klamath Community College has recently hired a director of apprenticeship program and are building a giant building. So we're really in the process of developing the workforce. If you're in the world of talking about career readiness locally, you're almost strictly talking about the trades right now. You're almost strictly developing trade pathways, different ways to get young people into the trades. Our Eagle Ridge High School here in Klamath Community College have the first fully approved program in the state of Oregon where you can do a carpentry apprenticeship program and not only get dual credit, but get dual time. So you are actually in high school knocking off hours and getting that apprenticeship. So it's definitely a chicken and the egg, and we're 100% behind the ball on this one, but moving very quickly.
I would add one thing to the housing credit availability one, and this is one we've been trying to get policymakers to adopt, and so far no luck, so maybe we can do it here for the county or the city, is backstopping some of these loans. Like, we've been out and looked at projects in Pendleton, Lincoln City, a couple places on the coast, where the housing demand is there, they got the lot, they just can't get underwriting because of the industry consolidation and the loan decisions aren't made locally. And so one of the things is the risk, right? Sometimes the public sector doesn't even have to put up any real money, they just have to backstop the loan, because during the construction phase and the lease-up phase and all that sort of stuff, right? Just saying we will backstop, I don't know, 5–10%, whatever it is, will go a long way, and something like that can help underwrite and get some of these projects off the ground. But something that a natural fit for the role of the public sector in the economy, and we're not doing it. I don't really know why.
Yes.
I'm Tiffany Cotton. I've been in this community since 1989, and that's continued to show connection to community knowledge. From OIT. The strategic plan was written in 2019, long before pandemic was ever a term in everybody's vocabulary. The 4-year-old grandmother knows pandemic. What were the successes of the intentions and the priorities of that 2019 strategic plan that were realized, and how are those things moving forward as we're developing the next strategic plan going forward?
So this question, for those that couldn't hear, is about, sort of addressing where the 2019 strategic plan did right and sort of momentum moving forward, and whoever wants to address.
So I assume you're talking about the strategic plan that Quesita had put together, correct? Okay. So I happened to be president of Quesita at the time, and I can tell you that the strategic plan had a lot of broad strokes, but one thing that we did do mostly accomplish from that strategic plan is start to address the housing issue. So the investment group that Chad was alluding to, we have put together a group of investors that is now trying to develop what we're calling workforce housing. So housing that fits within the price range of that, $185,000 to $250,000 house that a kind of a living wage can't afford, and that we have a gap in this community in providing that type of house for. We have a lot of homes that are older that probably aren't very valuable just because of their age. And then we have a lot of houses on the market that are well above that 300,000, even 400,000 mark that are actually available. So we had that gap that we knew that we needed to fill, and we kept being told, gosh, I'd love to move to Klamath and I could get a job there, but I can't find a place to live. And so we have been trying to address that, and I think we've been moving as fast as we can on that, but we're still not moving fast enough. Chad, you might be able to add something to that, just because you were involved with that more, and Chad's been more involved with the board in the last year than I have. But I know that we've been trying very hard to focus on things that we can control, like I mentioned at the beginning of this panel discussion, and housing is one of those things that we can influence as a community and as a board.
So this was a concept, COVID warped time, so I think it was 2 years ago when this plan actually came together. And I could be wrong on, like I said, I don't know how many months it's been since COVID started. But we've got, last time I checked, 7 houses started. And so, yes, that's a drop in the bucket. That's a whole heck of a lot farther than zero and no fund. So the team has worked on that, and the people in the community have come together on that. It's been awesome to see. And once again, we're developing the expertise internally in this community, and that's real sustainability. So kudos to everybody who's actually rolled up their sleeves and done the hard work on that. I had the pleasure of coming in after the hard work was done. So.
Great. Oh, sorry, Chip. Yes, please.
So I kind of have a follow-up to the gentleman over here, and I'm kind of curious, have we heard anything within the local market around strategies that employers are using and they're seeing some success in attracting, retaining, and I would even add developing employees here locally after going through the struggles we've gone through?
I know I've had to increase my wages, which I don't feel is bad. I think that's good for the community. From other employers that I've just talked to, they're putting incentive-based in more rapidly than what they were originally intending. Somebody has a major employer perspective?
I don't have an employer perspective, but to take it a slightly different direction, we all basically generally agree that one of our biggest assets is quality of life. But I think it's really, really important to realize that what we're actually going for is quality of family life. We're not going for quality of retiree life, right? We're trying to recruit young families, young employers. So I think that is something that's important to remember and to focus on our assets in that area. Tiger Stadium needs to stand. I'm on the board of the Ross Ragland Theater, even though I have zero experience or stage talent whatsoever. But I don't want to raise my kids in an area that doesn't have access and incorporation of the arts. I think it's an instant death blow if we don't have a beautiful, active community theater here, as well as the sports infrastructure. So I do think in looking at attracting and retaining employees, we really need to remember it's quality of family life that we're looking at fostering.
I'll speak broadly from kind of a large employer aspect with the hat that I wear at Sky Lakes Medical Center. I had the opportunity to work on some employee benefit package where we were trying to bring child care benefits to some of our employees at the hospital. And that's a very hard thing to start from scratch with. And so myself and a couple other employees at Sky Lakes, we did some research on what we could do, what resources already existed, and we even went as far as to, we brought in a child care provider that was thinking about building a brand new facility on some property that the hospital owned that we had no plans for in the future for developing. And so we were trying to leverage that asset. Obviously, that was 2 years ago when we were doing that. But since then, I've actually had some good conversations with folks kind of across the country about childcare, and that being a component for their employees that is very important for retention. I had an opportunity to talk with some staff at the city of Los Angeles, who they rapidly developed a child care benefit for all of their employees within the city of Los Angeles to provide child care for all of their families, because that became a huge barrier for productivity and just being able to attend their workday. Same thing with the state of Missouri. I had the opportunity to talk to the director of their, I forget the actual name of the agency, but it's basically their behavioral health equivalent for their state. And so it was a large state department that they were doing the same thing with, where they were trying to provide child care benefits. So every large employer is kind of scratching their heads around this same concept, and it's becoming a bigger and bigger issue when you have more and more households who are dual income households, right? This is obviously top of mind for me today because my wife could go into labor at any moment. So, it's very important for, my wife and I who, we both work. And so for us to be able to show up to work, we've got to be able to have a safe place for our kids to go. And I think that's it's a growing common theme across the country and across the workforce.
Congratulations, by the way. That's awesome. Hopefully everyone's healthy. So, wow, the pandemic taught us one thing nationally is that we were a little naive to think that the supply of affordable, cheap labor was abundant and never-ending, right? We learned that lesson the hard way. And what we've learned is that for the most part, there isn't a lot of slack in the labor market. Maybe nationally there's still some. Here locally there's not a lot of slack, meaning that most people are engaged with the labor force, are mostly employed. Number of unemployed are down, we looked at that. So as an employer, if you're looking for how to recruit, how to retain workers, I think one of the things that, it's sort of like back to the future a little bit, there once upon a time was this thing called on-the-job training, where you would maybe recruit someone who was sort of showed potential, had the opportunities to sort of skill them up to the worker you needed, but at that moment they weren't a perfect candidate, but they showed potential. So hiring some of those people and sort of loosening the standards is one thing you can do on the hiring side, and then providing that on-the-job training. And there are public resources out there for on-the-job training programs. So that's critical. But the other one is understanding the asset that is your current workforce. And with the quit rate that has we just got the headlines, the national numbers hit a new record high for quits in November. Was it December? November.
The national December.
It was December that just came out this week. Yeah.
No, November, right? The state data is only October.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah. Anyways, this fall, whenever it was, we just hit a new all-time record for quits nationally. And once again, people think, oh my gosh, all these workers are just leaving the labor force. They're not leaving the labor force. They're quitting their one job and they're reshuffling into new jobs. They're finding better wages, better quality of life, more flexibility, whatever they're looking for, a better career opportunity. These are things that societally we think are generally a good thing, by the way. Like, we want to see our children, our grandchildren, whoever, work their way up the spectrum in their career and find increasingly more satisfying job opportunities. That's what's happening. So as an employer, you could create those opportunities internally. How do we create a pipeline to say, hey, we're hiring you here, but we have a plan for you to get here, and retain that workforce and not lose into the quits, to the reshuffle for some better potential that's out there. So yeah, it's a tough situation, but I think the on-the-job training and the retention strategies are so critical right now.
Okay, so we probably have time for perhaps one more question. Matt?
Just curious what companies, retail, restaurants, or even manufacturing, you guys think Klamath County is missing or would like to see here?
So question was what retailers or companies, et cetera, might Klamath be missing?
Josh would say In-N-Out.
Two things that are glaringly obvious from the industrial structure perspective is not In-N-Out. Well, I'll defend them. I'm not even from California. It is the finance component, the insurance component, is that we don't have a lot of that as a share of the workforce. And frankly, again, that tends to be the stuff that's concentrated. San Francisco, Chicago, North Carolina. Yeah, you're never going to replicate Wall Street, but having some more of those local capital access points would obviously be good. And then just some of the office professional-based work, whether it's accountants or attorneys or, that vein of stuff tends to be city-centric as well. But that is something that tends to be on the higher end of the pay scale and represents good growth opportunities moving forward as we continue to shift away, not totally, but more away from goods production and into more service-based economy. That's going to continue in the decades ahead. So whatever we can do to get more of those would be a step.
Could I just add that all of the In-N-Outs in the western states use potatoes that come from Klamath County.
Sure, Glenn.
I once heard an interview with Dan Jr. from Bluegill Project, who was the originator of it, and he was asked the question, what do you see as a trend in communities that are most successful economically
Yes. Our own superhero. Wink, wink. Everyone probably knows that.
Could I add on to what Glenn said? Totally agree with the health aspect, and that ties into when talking to some younger people about what do you want to see here. Of course, there's maybe more activities, maybe more restaurants, but one of the key ones I heard that ties into housing is decent apartments that are built around having a gym and a community area and more community for that age group to meet each other and network. And I think that in part of solving that is the land ready, getting land ready for that, and then apartments that are a pretty quick build, such as what IntelliFab has. I think that's an important piece to start looking into for the housing.
I think to answer kind of both questions, the lack of retail opportunities and health, the same solution I think is we actually have a gap in availability of kind of like rental kayaks and just like rental like recreational equipment. So like when people do come here and visit the community, we've had a lot of people comment of like, well, how am I going to go float the Wood River if I don't have access to a kayak or something like that, where we do have a gap there, and I think we have some retail opportunities there. The Ledge does a great job of providing a lot of opportunities, but they only have so many kayaks to rent out. And I've actually had friends visit where we call up and they're out of kayaks, they can't rent them. So we call friends and try to gather as many as we can and go about our adventure that way. But we have opportunities to promote those healthy activities if we have the opportunity to have more retail availability.
All right, so you'll get the very last question then, and then Randy will come up and close us.
This is for Paul. A lot of the slides that we saw today excluded ag. And having grown up here, that's been a big part of who we are. So, where are we, Paul? $1 million question.
Well, so, in terms of numbers, this is 10-year-old data from Oregon State University, but as of 10 years ago, if you take the upper Klamath Basin, that includes Klamath County and Tule Lake, basically, the economic contribution of agriculture is $600 million a year. Now, so you update that, and there's probably been quite a lot of vertical integration since that time. So that's, I do know ag employers who employ up to 100 workers, depending on the time of year, and half of that on a permanent basis. I don't know the total number of jobs, to tell you the truth, but it's in the thousands, less than 10,000 in this region. Water it's all about water right now going forward. And this past year was a drought year, and I'll get fired if I don't say this, was a drought year, but in the most comparable drought year in the last 40 years, all of the land in this area was irrigated, pretty much fully irrigated. So that's attributable to, the change is attributable to a change in federal policies and the approach to the implementation of certain federal laws. And I'm not saying that's good or bad, I'm saying it's true. So we have to deal with that as the overwhelming need, and all of these things are a combination of science and politics and law and all these things. But the part of the challenge here, and we say this all the time, is that a huge percentage of the population used to live on farms, and now it's a fraction of 1% live on farms, and people in the urban areas don't know where their food comes from. They think it comes from the grocery store. So we speak of potatoes that are produced here. The same place produces potatoes for Walmart as produces for Whole Foods. And people don't know that. It's just a matter of which way they direct their production line. So there's no silver bullet for that. We in my group, we work in all of those arenas: law, policy, science, what have you. But there will be one day some sort of negotiated stability of some sort. I don't know what that will look like. I'm not saying it'll be the way that it used to be. It's a question of who negotiates that and what the dynamics are at the time that that occurs, that there has to be, there's a crying need. And all of much of our efforts to try to get all of us properly incentivized and to try to make that happen. So it's something that, I'm afraid of losing around here. There is, if, current family farm operations can't sustain themselves, that land isn't gonna go vacant, someone's gonna buy it. It'll work in somebody's business model, but that somebody may be Bill Gates, or maybe the largest agricultural landowner in the United States, and the sort of the community that goes with the current agricultural production will wither. So it's a complicated challenge, but I'm a glass half full guy, so I think I'm just saying we're at the bottom and we're on our way back up.
Thank you, Paul. So as Randy comes up to close us out, can we give our panelists a really nice round of applause?
Well, I was just hoping for that one positive last question there, Paul. I want to thank you guys. Please, again, remember you have this document. Your ideas and suggestions would be greatly appreciated as we go to write our next 3-year strategic plan. Comments about today's event. We hope to have this on an annual basis, and any comments and suggestions would be great. Thank you for choosing Klamath. We believe it's just better here, and I think you heard a lot about that today. Thanks so much for your morning. I appreciate your attendance. Look forward to seeing you again soon.